Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our ongoing coverage of A Game of Thrones, bringing you the best thoughts, theories, and literary analysis this side of Maegor's Holdfast.
Oh, very, very good.
Today we're talking about Sansa, Chapter 4. Things have really started to turn. Once again, we must ask ourselves, is this the chapter where Ned Stark loses? And I think we are definitely beyond that point now.
Oh, he has lost time.
It was 3 or 4 chapters ago.
It
so
was.
We are digging through the aftermath of that now. We've got a bunch of theories and ideas that we're going to talk through, as usual, in this 52nd volume of our Game of Thrones coverage.
52nd. I need to pause for a second. Okay, so 52 weeks in a year, which means that this is a year of doing this. But Cameron, we started doing this in December of last year. You know how lately everything's felt like we're living in a simulation and nothing exists and nothing is real?
Yes.
This is another example of that. Dear listener, down below, can you tell us, number one, did we count wrong? Number two, are there actually not 52 weeks in a year and we've been lied? Because when have you sat down and counted the weeks in the year? Have you ever done that before?
No, I think it's pretty reliably 52.
I think we're being lied to, and I want some answers because it's only November the 18th or something. What's going on? I just need some clarity. I don't trust anything anymore. Anyway, this is volume 52, apparently. Welcome back. Did we do 2 in a week?
No, well, sometimes we overlap when we're ending one project and moving on to another one.
Yes.
So maybe we started it a little bit before The Witcher ended?
Maybe we put the prologue out early. I don't know.
What happens in this chapter, Maggie?
Let me tell you. Sorry, I really needed to get this out, and I was so confused.
Spoilers for everything in the book and the show.
Yes, so this is Sansa number 4. So Sansa has been locked in her room inside Maegor's Holdfast, as you said, for 3 days. She's in there with her friend Jane Poole, and they don't know what's happening. All that Sansa has heard is that people are being killed, and they're pretty stressed and scared about what's going on. And finally, on this 3rd day, Sir Boros Blount of the King's Guard comes to take Sansa to see the Queen, so she goes with him. And they get to the council chambers, and Cersei is in there along with Peter Baelish, Maester Pycelle, and Lord Varys.
Can you describe what Cersei's wearing, please?
She's wearing a black dress. Everybody's wearing all black because the king has just died. So she's wearing all black, but the bodice of her dress is encrusted with teardrop shaped rubies.
100 of them.
Yeah, all the way from her waist all the way up to her neck. And I was like, I want to wear this dress just on the regular.
To podcast.
Just going to the grocery store, to curbside pickup. I want to wear this dress. Anyway, so cool. Pity that they didn't do this in the show, but I guess rubies are expensive or something, but whatever.
Well, they could have been fake.
No, they had to only use real ones, Cam, obviously. Anyway, so it's pretty cool. And she's disappointed that Joffrey's not there, but that's fine. And here we get to see Cersei really flourishing. She's doing some master manipulating here. She tells Sansa how much she and Joffrey love her and tells her that, I'm really sorry to tell you, but your father is a traitor. And so she pulls out the letter that Ned sent to Stannis, telling him to come, take his rightful throne. Of course, Cersei doesn't read the whole letter. She doesn't tell Sansa about, the incest and all that. But that's kind of her proof. And she just says that just after Robert had died, Ned plotted to take the throne and to give it to Stannis. And Sansa's, of course, very confused. She's like, but my father would never do that. But this woman who likes me and trusts me and loves me is also telling me that it's happened, so I don't know what's going on. And Cersei expresses some concern that the daughter of a traitor might marry her son. She's like, how can I trust this person to marry my son? And so Sansa's like, what? But I want to marry Joffrey. And so that's sort of what is driving her through this whole interaction. We also get a little sidebar here. We learned that, I believe if my timelines are right, the morning after Robert died, or was dying in his bedchamber, Sansa went to tell Cersei that Ned was sending her back to Winterfell. She wanted to tell Robert, but she's afraid of Robert. But she thought, well, King Robert can, command my father to let me stay here. And so she goes to tell Cersei to try to get her to tell Robert that. So that's not good. But they end up convincing Sansa to write letters to her family, asking them to pledge loyalty to King Joffrey and to separate themselves from Ned. Basically, if you can prove that you and the rest of your family aren't traitors like your dad, that your dad is an outlier, then you can stay here and marry Joffrey and everything will be fine. And Sansa is convinced that this is the only way she'll get to marry Joffrey. She also thinks to herself, well, once we're married and once I'm queen, I can convince Joffrey to pardon my father and everything will be fine. So that's what she does. So she writes a letter to Catelyn, Robb, Lysa, and her grandfather, Catelyn's father, Hoster Tully, to ask them to all come and pledge loyalty to King Joffrey. it's not good. This poor girl. And so they say thank you very much. And they send Sansa back to her room where she reads stories about knights and princes. And as she's falling asleep, she realizes that she didn't ask about Arya at all. And that's where we end it.
Yeah, interesting
Rough
chapter.
stuff.
This is a turning point for me, and I want to get to that later. But
Okay.
the first thing I found myself thinking about reading this chapter, I had this book when I was younger. It had a white cover. I could have just looked it up, but it's more fun having it live in my memory.
Okay.
It was a white cover, and I believe there was a little wizard on the front, and it was called Fractured Fairy Tales.
Oh.
And it was like silly, kind of fun, dark retellings of classic stories
Cool.
with little twists to it.
That sounds fun.
I loved it, obviously. I mean, you can tell. You guys know me enough by this point, 450 episodes in.
I got to find this
that's
book.
my
I wanna
kind of
read
thing,
it.
right?
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that idea of kind of a twist on a classic, kind of adding this dark turn to this classic fable that we're all more or less familiar with. Because Sansa kind of trips backwards into a classic high fantasy story in this chapter. If we zoom out, she's kind of the princess stuck in the tower.
Totally. She's at the top of the highest tower at one point, and I thought, oh, that's so romantic and wonderful, but she's not even recognizing it as that.
Right.
Because that's a moment in her like journey of this chapter where she's like, everything's going wrong, nothing's going how it's supposed to go, like it goes in the songs.
But she's the most romantic and idealistic and keyed into things like songs and stories and all of those ideals. And she ends up in the nightmare version of that high fantasy that she has so idolized her entire life. So she's kind of in this fractured fairy tale against her will. But she's isolated. The isolation is what really caught me in this chapter, because it is so carefully and rigorously maintained. The way Cersei quietly removes Jane Poole from being in the room with Sansa to make sure there's no one else giving her any information.
Right.
Sansa is kind of preserved in amber here. She's isolated from reality. None of the guards, even Boris Blunt, the guy who walks her to this council meeting, no one will give her any answers. She's kept from truth. She's kept from news. And in that gulf of information, what rushes in to fill the void? But stories and songs and myths and ideals. And I think there is a romance to that. I mean, you and I are both kind of suckers for that idea of the way art can be healing or contemplative, or kind of a balm or a salve that can heal you.
An escape also, yeah.
Exactly. And that's usually where I would go with this. But there's something harsher happening. There's something nastier underneath that. Because the function of these stories, which are allowed in the Red Keep, these are the books that are allowed there, where the Lannisters will just kill interlopers and massacre all of the Starks. There is a death grip level of control over what happens in the Red Keep. These books are allowed.
That's true, yeah.
Which means they are controlled variables, which means they are useful to the establishment. These stories, they keep Sansa ignorant. They keep her unprepared. They keep her trusting of all of these people and these higher ideals. And of course, Joffrey's so honorable, he would never kill my father.
Right.
The things that she's taking from these stories placate her. There's a malicious kind of intent here, because the end goal of her escaping into these manicured specific stories is complacency and delusion and this acceptance and maintenance of the status quo. This felt like a radical expansion of the idea you and I have discussed throughout this book and throughout our Witcher coverage of particularly songs, and again, the series is called A Song of Ice and Fire, being this propaganda outlet where we can launder history and ideas. Did you see this as an escalation?
I just saw it more as an emphasis on what we have come to know about Sansa, but I totally see what you mean. And I think, the songs are really prevalent here because she is abiding by them so much. And I think she uses these songs not just as a, like, this is what my life should be like, but we talked last Sansa chapter about how she tries to write her own songs or craft her life in a way that it matches a song. Like it's sort of the inverse of what you're talking about with this thing that we saw in The Witcher, where troubadours and these singers and songwriters create history, create legend. They write these songs that are not always totally accurate to what's happening around them, but they're crafting a story that people like. They're crafting the thing that people will remember versus the actual truth. Sansa's kind of doing the opposite. She is constantly trying to craft and manipulate her own reality to be like a song and to match the truths that she thinks are real. Do you know what I mean? So she's sort of doing it in reverse.
I'm reminded of Dandelion, who was one of the lead characters in The Witcher, who was one of these singers. And we would see Geralt do something despicable, and then in real time see Dandelion sanitize and change the events that happened to make it a more presentable song
Romantic.
that would make Geralt look more efficient and guarantee them future employment. So we would see the motivations and then the twisting of the facts happen there. I think it's interesting what's happening with Sansa too, because she does have these moments of enlightenment where things, the reality shines through.
Right.
At the beginning, she's talking about hearing people fight in Winterfell. She hears, the swords clashing with swords. But then when it happens in real life here, and it's not practice, it's not pretend, she said, she kind of notes darkly that the songs never include the soldiers screaming or begging for mercy.
Yeah, exactly.
But by the end of the chapter, she completely papers over that
she's
and
back
just
to reading the stories.
Ostrich, head in sand. Nope, the ideals are real, and if I believe in Tinkerbell hard enough, then she'll survive the rest of the play.
Right, exactly. It's so sad, and it
is sad.
It's interesting because I think the easiest reading of that is that she's just stupid, but I don't think that's what it is.
Me neither.
I just think she truly believes that she can change things. Because what I was noticing a lot here was not only like how much she is still like clinging to these ideals that she has about Joffrey is this gallant prince who will never hurt my father, who I have to marry. My life is supposed to be like this song. We see her using words like I have to, or you have to, or it has to be this way, or I must, or you must do this. She says that a lot. That type of wording appears 16 times in this chapter.
Oh, wow.
I was going to write them all down. I thought I'm just going to count them. This is stupid. And so, you see her like, again, really trying to actively craft her life into a song and just like force it through sheer willpower. But what's interesting is that a good chunk of those, you must do this or it must be this ways, those phrases come from Cersei and not Sansa. Cersei says to Sansa many, many times, you must do this. You must write to your family. You must prove to us that you're not a traitor. You must do X, Y, and Z. But she does it in a way that's not commanding her. At no point does Sansa feel afraid of Cersei in this chapter. She feels afraid of what could happen if she doesn't do the right thing. She feels afraid of, things not going the way she wants them to. But she's not afraid of Cersei. Cersei is not scary to her. Cersei makes herself seem very like appealing and motherly and maternal and like a friend to Sansa and almost a role model. And so, so it feels like Cersei's skill here is that she understands Sansa. She understands that Sansa sees the world this way, as things have to be this way. Like this is how it's supposed to go. You have to make sure it goes the way you want it to go.
Well, we talked about, remember in the last Ned chapter, we talked about Cersei kind of fumbling the ball, where she could have taken things a lot further and kind of sealed the deal and taken out Ned in that chapter. And she was dealing with, even though Ned has his ups and downs, he is a more capable player. He's more of an equal intellectually, strategically for Cersei than Sansa is. And I think the function of that little flashback scene of finding out that Sansa went to Cersei and spilled her guts, and the way it's even recalled within the narrative is that Cersei just sat there and listened. I think that was Cersei kind of being her father's daughter for a moment and hearing the way Sansa views the world.
Yes,
hearing how she thinks, how she forces this kind of fairy tale logic onto proceedings. And then the way she talks to her here uses everything she learned from that little confessional they had in the earlier scenes. She's speaking her language.
Exactly. And I think that works really well because otherwise, even though Cersei's had other interactions with Sansa, I think it might be kind of hard as a reader for us to believe that Cersei could manipulate Sansa so well and understand her so well. But you're right, that conversation kind of just gives you further, oh, that was her ammunition. And you can tell that Sansa, like Cersei can tell that Sansa is fully not aware of the reason why she's going back to Winterfell, and that Sansa's number one motivation is, I have to marry the handsome prince, and like things have to be like the songs. And so she's like, okay, I'm going to use that. And we really see Sansa's, do you have more about the fairy tales? Because I have a sort of a tangent to go on.
I just wanted to roll it it into the larger idea we've been playing with,
Okay,
because
sure.
we talked about, if you remember a couple chapters ago, I was talking about Ned and is this a character flaw within him or a larger critique that George R. R. Martin is making? Why extend the suffering here? What are we supposed to take from that almost meditation within this character's failure? And I think some of that pays off here because Sansa, especially as she digs further into stories and songs, I think she is as taken by the narrativity that killed Ned. And I think it's her trying to graft her worldview onto the chaos of the real world.
Yeah.
Where she thinks there is a moral to this story.
Yes.
We were talking about that grimdark thing and nihilism. And I think Sansa believes there is a moral to the story, that there is justice, that if she plays her cards right and invokes these higher ideals and tries to live up to them, that she will be justly rewarded and everything will turn out the way it's supposed to. And at this point, it's the first time is tragedy, second time is farce. It's interesting seeing, I mean, we're not going to talk about another Ned chapter, I think, through the end of the year. There's a real break from him in the narrative now that he's just imprisoned.
Cool.
And it's interesting that Sansa's the one who picks up that thread.
That is really interesting. Yeah, no, this is the tangent I was going to go on, is that we get a really another clear sense of her morality system and how she views the world, not just as things have to be like fairy tales, but in terms of morality. Like, there's a real black and white binary way that she views these things. We see it in the way that she talks about Jane. When she's with Jane, she has this really nasty moment where Jane's been crying a lot, and Sansa thinks to herself, she's such a child. But then Sansa thinks of herself later on in the chapter as a lady. It says she was determined to be a lady no matter what, or she was resolved to be a lady no matter what. And so she's separating herself from Jane. It's you're either a child or you're a lady. There's no in between. And then when she's talking to Cersei, she says that Jane Poole, this is where she's being nice about Jane. She says she hasn't done anything wrong. She's a good girl. She keeps saying good. She's like, I'm good. I'm not like Arya. I'm good. Joffrey is a good and gallant prince. She thinks of things as good or bad. There's no in between. So she's like, how could my father possibly be a traitor? He's good. But then over the course of her conversation, Cersei convinces Sansa that her father is bad. But Sansa doesn't want to see herself as bad. She doesn't want other people to see her as bad. So she has to make herself appear good. So it's very, very black and white for her. I don't think she, at this point, is capable of recognizing nuance, which is really interesting because at the beginning of this chapter, she's putting on a gray dress. And so this is the thing that she and Ned have in common, I think. Not that Ned doesn't see nuance, because he does, but that there are things around them in the narrative, in the story, in the setting, that should be cluing them into what's going on, and they're just missing it. Sansa is missing is missing the nuance of the world, is missing that things are much more complicated than there are good people and bad people. And Ned is missing all kinds of cues, like we talked about. And even at the very end, when Sansa is reading those fairy tales, one of the things she reads about is Prince Aemon and his doomed love for his brother's queen. Doomed love. Sansa's whole motivation here is her love, or what she thinks is love, for Joffrey. And I feel like this story right here, that's a clue to us, the reader, that Sansa's love for Joffrey is doomed. But she's not seeing it that way. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
She's just not quite aware of the signs that are being given to her. She's misinterpreting them a little bit.
She's play acting. I was really taken with her preoccupation with courtesies. If you look at any of the major players within this world, say Varys, Littlefinger, Cersei, everyone who's at that small council table, what is the function of courtesies?
To hide.
Exactly.
To keep things steady and to hide.
It's a poker face.
Yeah.
It is to conceal your actual plans. It's to not have any tells.
Yeah.
So she's cloaking herself, she's draping herself in the aesthetic of what she sees and likes around her, right? She's being polite to everyone, but there's no interiority. There's no plan that she's concealing.
No, she only knows the outside. Yeah.
So her putting on a gray dress, but having no nuance or greater plan or scheme or understanding, I think that's just a nice kind of token visual of what she's doing by cherry picking some of these aesthetics without embodying any of the underlying plan.
Right. I like that. And even in moments where she is a bit more privy to or understanding of the realities of the world she's living in, she immediately hides or turns away from it, or it gets forgotten. Like, for example, when she's in the small council room with these people Peter Baelish is looking at her in his creepy way, the way he does. He's like, she reminds me of her mother. And he's just being, his creepy self. And there's a moment where it says like she felt really uncomfortable. Every time he looks at her, it feels like she's not wearing any clothes and she just gets really bad, creepy vibes from him. But then a moment later, somebody mentions her getting married to Joffrey. And so the narrative says Peter Baelish was forgotten. All that mattered was Joffrey.
Yeah.
Like she just brushes that stuff aside immediately. Again, as like by sheer willpower, she's going to make her life the way that she thinks it should be. She's going to pretend that Peter Baelish isn't creeping her out. She's going to pretend that, well, my father is a traitor, but it's all going to be okay. I can just write these letters and it's all going to be fine. And we've seen her see the bad sides of Joffrey. We've seen her recognize that Joffrey is not the prince she has imagined he is, but she continues to pretend that it's not like that. So the courtesies, she is hiding, but she doesn't have plans. It's more that she's like hiding from what she sees around her. She
excuses the things that don't fit the worldview or the plan.
Yes.
It reminds me of the mantra we saw throughout the Pearl Maxine trilogy, which we covered over on Patreon. And there's this same willpower that drives this central female character, and this refrain that she has of "I will not accept a life I don't deserve." I think I
do not deserve, but yeah.
And there's this idea of ignoring the stuff that doesn't fit the worldview and just constantly striving and pushing for this to manifest this fantasy, and that always spirals out in resentment and grief. And we're seeing Sansa kind of push away the reality and still try to bury her head in the songs. And I'm wondering, I mean, we don't know how her story ends at all.
No.
So I'm interested to see if we're going to get that kind of blowout finale like we did with X and Pearl and Maxine.
Sure. Yeah, me too. It's interesting. And I do like the end here where she and Arya have something in common. We talked last Arya chapter, that Arya never once mentions or thinks of Sansa. Arya is purely focused on getting out. She barely even thinks of her father. I think there's maybe a moment where she kind of figures out my dad is probably dead. Like I think she kind of has that moment, but otherwise she doesn't think about Sansa at all. And Sansa does the same thing. She barely thinks about Arya. When she does, when she's talking to Cersei, she's like trying to distance herself from Arya. But they have this thing. So that's the thing they have in common. But then what's different is that Arya is looking at the world in a very different way compared to Sansa and Ned. And Arya is the one who escapes. And I think that's really interesting.
Yes, because she's adapting. We talked about that for 40 minutes last week.
Yeah.
She's adapting to circumstance. She's not denying reality and trying to manifest the fantasy. So I think this is a good transition into the thing I was most wrestling with in this chapter. And it's this concept of waning audience sympathy. So I remember, this is the fourth Sansa chapter. And if you remember during the incident with the direwolf and Joffrey and Arya, the knock I had against Sansa is that she took sides against the family.
Yeah, immediately.
Which I can't stand.
She immediately was like distancing herself from them. Yeah.
But I have such sympathy and enjoyment for the depth of her character that in the intervening chapters, I really enjoyed her. I liked the way it was presented. I mean, obviously she's adolescent and flawed, but I think there's such a humanity and kind of earnestness within her character that I thought that was okay.
Yeah.
She's petty, she's selfish, she's youthful, but it's kind of funny and charming and understandable.
Yeah.
I relate to it.
Definitely.
But this chapter is different. And this, I think, in the long arc of the series is where I start to turn against Sansa.
I think a lot of people do here, too.
And I want to break that down. And I'm going to kind of do some devil's advocate against myself, but feel free to add to that.
Okay.
Maybe it's the heightened contrast of juxtaposing this chapter immediately against the previous chapter, which was Arya.
Yeah, where Arya is like, you only feel sympathy for her and you only respect everything she's doing, even though she literally guts a person. Sansa doesn't kill anybody
for a good reason,
here.
But it's ultimate loyalty and principle.
Exactly.
She doesn't stick her head in the sand.
But Sansa wouldn't even see that the way that we do, because she would see, Arya, you killed somebody, you're a savage, you're bad, you're not good, you're not a lady,
Right. And it's the disloyalty for me that ruins Sansa in this chapter. And again, I don't want that to stick, but at least within these 9 pages, the fact that she writes these letters, I mean, that's some familial treason.
It is, but...
I know, I'll get there.
Okay.
Just let me lay it out.
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
She sells out Ned. She forgets Arya completely. And she lies to all of her other living family members just so that she can prosper. This is not a moment of she walks in, Cersei grabs her, hands her this letter that's pre-written, holds a gun to her head and says, you have to sign this now.
Right. Or I'll kill you.
Or I'm going to kill you and your dad. It's not that. There are moments where Sansa can consider things.
Yes.
And she decides that because the path to getting what she wants, to her alone prospering and getting to marry Joffrey, is this family heresy. And she makes that decision. So jumping on the other foot, kind of playing devil's advocate here. What choice did she have? Like immediately
Right.
countering that, what fucking choice did she have? And this is the kind of quicksand of this chapter. I think she had two choices. One is refuse to do what Cersei wanted and be killed. Or exiled and killed. But ruin.
Yes.
Absolute ruin
Yeah.
the rest of her life.
Sure.
The second option was to capitulate. To dishonor her family, to survive the day. And that I could have made my peace with. Yes, she's a child. Yes, she's completely outmaneuvered, outmanned, the whole Hamilton thing. But that's not what she does here. She doesn't capitulate, dishonor her family just to survive the day.
Right. She doesn't lie, basically. She's not pretending to do what she's been asked to do. She actually does it.
And it's even worse than that because we are within her POV.
Yes.
We are within her head. And within her subconscious, within her thoughts, there is no secret, private vow of revenge. Like Arya with her list that we're going to get later.
Right.
There is no vow of vengeance. She just panics, defaults to self-interest, like all the worst characters in this world, and sells her family down the river.
Yeah. I think I can add some I can complicate that for a bit if you like. I agree with what you're saying. She didn't make a good choice here, but I think that she's not doing it because she does have a secret plan. Her secret plan is when I'm queen.
To fight inflation.
She has the concept of a plan. I'm sorry. So there's two references at once. That was good. She has a secret plan to when she becomes queen, she's going to pardon her father. She convinces herself that, well, yeah, father's going to have to be punished for his treason, but they'll probably just exile him to a free city for a couple years. And then once we're married, once I'm queen, we'll bring him back and I'll pardon him and it'll all be fine. Obviously, she's totally wrong. And
Does she believe that that's possible, though?
I think so. Well, the thing is, Sansa, she convinces herself that that's possible.
Okay, yeah.
She doesn't have her own belief system. It is so rooted in extrinsic things. It's rooted in songs and stories, and what she's been told is how things are supposed to be. She doesn't actually have her own morality system that she's sticking to. I think she's so extrinsically motivated by what's around her, and so she convinces herself that is possible. And that is what Cersei does so well here. Is you're right, Cersei doesn't hold a knife to her throat and tell her to write this. Cersei manipulates Sansa into coming to that conclusion on her own, into thinking that that's the right decision. I don't think for a moment Sansa truly believes that her father has committed treason. She keeps saying, there must be some mistake. My father would never do that. They were really good friends. I don't really understand. I mean, I don't think she's sitting there thinking, well, there's something fishy going on here and I'm going to have to kill the Lannisters somehow. I don't think she thinks that, but she's so good or bad. That's how she views everything. And so I think she's just thinking that there's some mistake was made. Her father maybe made a mistake, but it can be corrected. We can put things back to how they're supposed to be. I don't think she truly understands the ramifications and the implications of what she's doing here. I don't think she recognizes that she's betraying her entire family. I think she, and I'm not taking it so far to think that she's keeping them all safe. She's not that smart yet. She's not that aware of things. Again, she doesn't recognize the Lannisters are dangerous. She just doesn't. But I don't think that she is just saying, you know what, screw my family. I'm only going to do what's best for me. I mean, she's motivated. She's selfishly motivated, but not at the expense of her family. I think she just thinks that that's the best thing.
When Cersei brings up the incident with the direwolf by the river...
Well, Arya's different. I think Arya is separate.
Sansa concedes the point by saying Arya has the traitor's blood, not me.
Well, Arya,
she concedes the point about the traitor's blood.
You're right.
That's an unforgivable sin there.
You're right. Her relationship to Arya is very different from her relationship to the rest of her family.
But that's the family. You can't admit that your family has traitor's blood in it.
No, but
that
you
does
were
not just
but you were
indict the
saying
sister.
that she betrays her whole family by writing these letters, and Arya's not even part of that because Arya's not included in the discussion.
But she accepts the premise about Ned having traitor's blood. That's an indictment on the entire family, not just Arya.
But I'm saying I don't think she understands what that means. Like, what she keeps saying, I don't have the traitor's blood. Like, what even is that? I don't think she fully
she says
understands.
that other members of her family might, but that she doesn't,
Only
which does
Arya,
concede
though.
the point.
But she wants to prove
Where does Arya's blood come from? Her parents.
Yes, but she's thinking, okay, maybe it's my dad and maybe it's Arya. I don't like either of them right now.
That for me is too much of a concession. To
Yeah.
even acknowledge the maybe is too much.
But again, you're right. What choice does she have? Again,
to die with honor.
But Sansa
I know.
I mean,
this is where I get stuck.
No, I
because
mean,
I can't blame her for the rest of the series for this, but within this chapter, you know,
and
I don't know how to square
you're right.
this.
We could have been in her POV and have her brain thinking, there's no way my dad did this. Something is going on, but I'm going to have to lie. Like, or, oh, I love Arya so much. I hope she's okay, but I have to pretend to hate her for that. Like, she's not doing that. We know that. And even when you're watching the show, you could argue that because you can't see inside characters' brains in a TV show. But, but that's what's so great about Sansa is that she's not, that she's a little bit iffier and morally messy compared to somebody like Arya. But it's not a good look for Sansa. It's terrible. But what's really great is that I fully understand exactly why she made the decisions she made here.
Yeah, she's in an impossible circumstance, and those
Yeah.
are usually the most narratively interesting paradoxes.
And she is selfish. You're right.
Yeah.
Like, every decision she makes here is selfish. She's not trying to protect her family. She's trying to protect herself. But I don't think she understands how bad she's fucking up here.
And if I'm just spitballing and kind of zooming ahead for what I remember for the rest of her arc, I don't think she ever does anything this treasonous
Ever
on
again.
a familial level ever again.
And not on a like conscious level. Like going forward, I think that anytime she says my father was a traitor, that's a like, I'm lying so I don't get fucking beheaded right now, you know? So it's different after this. Cause I think after this is when she starts to see things go pretty badly.
Right.
So
right.
and especially after Ned is killed. So
yeah, this is her lowest point. Cause I was going to end with kind of the Darcy question of, is our good opinion once lost forever?
not with these characters. No, they're so complicated and they change constantly. So no, definitely not. Also, I have a great opinion of Cersei, even though she's evil, you know, so I adore her.
Mostly her fashion sense for you.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to play with here, again, I was talking about kind of mob terms earlier, but I was thinking about Goodfellas.
Of
and
course.
I was thinking about this scene when there's such great narration in that movie, and it's Henry talking about Paulie, who's the head of the family.
Yes.
And that Paulie won't use a phone.
That's right.
So he just has all of these runners bringing messages to him in person that he doesn't want to be on the record or have any kind of smoking gun that will indict him, literally.
Right, yeah.
He doesn't want to use the phone. So he just has all these people waiting by payphones. That's like some of the jobs of the people in the organization.
Amazing.
And that could have done a lot of good for a lot of these characters if they had that sort of paranoia.
Okay.
Because so many of the things that have driven the plot of this book so far are documented versions of communications that could be framed as treasonous.
I see. So
that's been the thing. Yeah, I have a couple of examples.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Every single letter that we have seen written in this book is a damning smoking gun later on.
It's true.
Lysa's letter accusing the Lannisters of killing Jon Arryn.
Yeah, that's the worst. Yeah.
Catelyn has the good sense to burn that.
Yeah, immediately.
But every other letter we've seen that is not burned, Ned's letter to Stannis inviting him to rebel against the crown. Sansa's treason letters. I mean, that's not going to make her look great later in a job interview.
Certainly not.
Jorah as secret agent, where he's eventually found out that he was sent to find Dany and work for her.
Yeah.
I think it's...
Sorry, even like Ned's decree that he writes on behalf of Robert that Cersei just tears up and uses as like almost a case against him. Yeah.
So it's interesting that all these things are written down, are later used as evidence against people. They testify against the people who wrote the letters.
Even the book, the lineages of the Lannisters and the Baratheons and all that. Yeah.
But I think it's interesting that those letters we just rattled off, they were all interpersonal letters. None of them... I believe none of them were sent by maesters. At least there's no confirmation of that.
Yeah, it was more like directly, like, this doesn't need to pass to any other hands. Like, I'm just going to straight up send it myself.
Yeah, I'm going to send it, or I have some friend who can act as courier, but they're not sent through maesters.
Okay.
And I think it's an interesting testament to the quiet power of maesters, who we haven't really gotten as central power players here.
Yeah.
But maybe that's the point. Because if you had sent it through like the official USPS, if you had the secure mail going through the maesters, maybe some of this wouldn't happen. I'm wondering if that is a more reliable kind of ring of communication.
But what would that look like? Like, how would that change things?
I don't know. Maester Lewin seems to buy the insurance to send his packages off, and he's got the ravens.
You're saying maybe they'd be more protected? Is that what you mean?
Maybe.
Like less likely to be seen by people they aren't meant to be seen by?
I just think it's interesting that they are conspicuously absent, and when they're not present, all of these communiques end up damning the people who write them.
Well, except the first one, which from Lysa, it came to Maester Lewin first. Maester Lewin takes it in and gives it to Catelyn. He doesn't read it, but he says...
Right, and that's the only one that ends well.
Yes, right. So that one actually did go through a maester. So.
I imagine he would have advised the burning of that even if she hadn't gotten there first.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, he would have been like, my lady, I recommend you burn that.
Because in the same way we're talking about the singers kind of sanitizing real events to create these histories, the maesters are kind of the, if you think about hockey or soccer, they are the goalies.
True.
They're the guys who decide what survives and what doesn't to move into the public record. Like, this chapter feels like an interesting POV on history. Because if you were just a historian who went to a museum or you got like the first-hand document behind the laminate and saw Sansa's letters, you would think, oh, damn, she hated her family.
Yeah.
She believed her father was guilty.
Right.
But this chapter is a real-time context for these letters. It is the little plaque on the wall at the museum explaining the context of this historical document, where you see the duress, you see the total quagmire that she's in, where there is no good choice she can make. But to a third party, generations later, it's just a document that more or less is going to be taken at face value. If you look at the gulf between Fire and Blood and House of the Dragon, where you have maesters after the fact trying to compile a history, versus House of the Dragon, we see the real time, how events actually unfold, instead of how they're sanitized and cannibalized into later histories, where the ambiguity is enlightened, right? We see how unreliable people actually are. We see that humility where we interact with actual documents. I just thought there was an interesting, almost forensic level of this chapter that I don't know, kind of pays dividends across Westeros.
Yeah, no, I do like that. And you would think that these maesters are supposed to be these like third party neutral record keepers, but we've seen very clearly that we've only interacted with three maesters, really: Maester Lewin, Maester Pycelle, and Maester Aemon. Maester Aemon is a different case because he's at the wall, and they are sort of by nature neutral in that they're not loyal to specific houses. They're just loyal to the wall and to the realm. And we see Maester Aemon do that, so that's great. Maester Lewin is very loyal to the Starks. He is like one of their most trusted people, and that's great for us and for the Starks, but maybe not for anybody else. Maester Pycelle is deeply loyal to the Lannisters, and that's very dangerous. And so, like, imagine if Ned had been like, okay, hey, Maester Pycelle, can you send this raven?
Right.
Like, that would have been disastrous.
Even the maesters at the Citadel have their own allegiances. We saw that through Fire and Blood, where various kings would have conflicts with the faith, or Old Town. Old Town's near the Citadel, I believe.
The Citadel's in Old Town,
There are geopolitics that fall on the Citadel, and they have their own allegiances to certain houses. They'll lie for certain people and bend the rules.
But everybody sees them as these like neutral players, and so that gives them quite a lot of power, which is really fun if we think about like Sam, who is basically training to become a maester, or will eventually. Right now he's just, personal aid to the maester, but we see him sort of dipping his toes into that pool of power, and that's really interesting, especially because I know we're going to go to Jon next, so I'm curious to see what is happening over there. But yeah, no, that's an interesting idea. You have this preoccupation with documents and letters and things being written down, and like Sansa having, it says like she knows her letters better than any of her brothers do. Like, she has that power, that kind of power that they don't exactly. Like, that's really interesting. So I like that. I want to pay attention to that because we really haven't before now. So that's interesting.
No, and this felt like the kind of thing I knew you would enjoy. That's why I wanted to kind of bounce past
I admired the museum discussion. That was fun.
And speaking of Fire and Blood, if you want our coverage of Fire and Blood, the source material for House of the Dragon, over on Patreon, there are 12 big-ass volumes of analysis going through that entire book. That took us a long time to put together, and you can enjoy all of those episodes right now, as well as years of other bonus content that we have amassed over there, including our Breakfast Buffet series, which is our roundup series. We just released volume 14, which was talking about really audacious, difficult films. We talked about The Apprentice, Megalopolis, and the Joker sequel, Folie à Deux. That was a really, really fun and I think rewarding conversation where we can really dig in, take it slow, and get into the messiness of art instead of just doing something quicker or more celebratory. I think sometimes it's fun to dig into things that didn't totally work.
Agreed.
We also have our 15th volume coming out this weekend.
Oh.
And let's see if we can do this off the dome.
Oh, I have no idea.
That one is talking about Azrael.
Oh, yeah.
And the Wild Robot.
Yeah.
And Slewfoot.
That's right. That was an interesting discussion. We did that a while back. I was
Azrael
like, I don't remember
is
this
this
at all.
like folk
Pocahontas. We talked about Pocahontas?
Post-apocalyptic folk horror starring Samara Weaving, who's incredible. And The Wild Robot is probably the best animated movie I've seen in a few years, with this gorgeous art style and tearjerker, beautiful story. And Slewfoot is a tale of bewitchery written and illustrated a little bit by one of the lead concept artists for the Diablo series, Brom, whose art we love so much. And Maggie's talking about that book. So you can go subscribe to the Patreon and check that episode. That'll be out this Sunday, so 2 days from now.
Amazing.
And of course, we'll be back next Friday to discuss the next John chapter already. Quick turnaround for John.
Yeah,
Usually we go months.
Yeah, but no, we're getting him right back again. I'm excited about that. We're really chugging along. I'm looking at this book. We are like, I mean, look at this. We're getting pretty far into it. We're probably, I don't know, 2/3 of the way in. So coming along.
And on Tuesdays, we've basically got horror for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited about
December is going to be very fun. December is a special theme that we'll tell you soon.
We're already grinding on that in the background. So thank you very much for listening and anticipating, and all the support on the Patreon means a lot to us. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you in just a few days over on Patreon for another brand new episode.